I'm Katie Byers, and this is Wild Tomorrow. Wild Tomorrow is independent conservation journalism, and this podcast is where I go deeper on the stories that matter. Wildlife policy, habitat, the fights being won and lost right now, and the people doing the actual work on the ground. No sponsored content, no PR-approved talking points, just the reporting. Let's get into it. I've spent enough time tracking wildlife stories to know when something shifts from coincidence to pattern. This week, black bears appeared in residential areas across Minnesota, Massachusetts, Ohio, Colorado, Pennsylvania, and New York. Not one or two isolated incidents. Simultaneous reports across regions that don't typically share ecological conditions. The official explanation landed quickly. Seasonal changes, warmer and drier conditions, bears seeking food and territory. Standard wildlife management messaging. The kind of statement designed to reassure the public without examining what's actually happening beneath the surface. But when I look at these incidents together, I see something else. I see a species responding to environmental pressure in real time. I see habitat fragmentation forcing wildlife into human spaces. And I see a conservation narrative that prioritizes human comfort over ecological truth. The pattern nobody wants to name. 6 states, different ecosystems, same week. Minnesota's sightings came from suburban neighborhoods. Massachusetts reported bears in residential yards. Ohio, a state where bear populations have been historically minimal, logged multiple encounters. Colorado and Pennsylvania, where bears are more common, saw increased activity in areas previously considered low risk. New York added to the count with reports from communities that hadn't seen bears in years. Wildlife officials issued the predictable advisories. Don't approach bears, secure trash, bring in bird feeders, keep pets indoors, supervise children, report nuisance activity. All practical advice, all reactive. What's missing from these advisories is any acknowledgement of why this is happening now across such a broad geographic range in areas where human bear encounters were previously rare or non-existent. The warmer, drier conditions explanation sounds reasonable until you examine what that really means. Warmer and drier conditions don't just make bears wander. They indicate habitat stress, food scarcity in natural environments, water source depletion, territory compression. Bears don't show up in residential neighborhoods because they prefer human company. They show up because their natural habitat can no longer support them. The uncomfortable reality of habitat fragmentation. I've written about habitat loss enough times to recognize the pattern. Development expands, natural corridors shrink, wildlife adapts or dies. Black bears have large home ranges. Males can cover 60 to 100 square miles, and females need 15 to 40 square miles. When development fragments that range, when logging or agriculture or suburban expansion cuts through traditional territory, bears don't simply disappear. They adjust. They move into spaces where food is accessible. Trash bins, compost piles, bird feeders, pet food left on porches, fruit trees in suburban yards. Human spaces become bear habitat not by choice, but by necessity. The simultaneous sightings across 6 states suggest something larger than individual bears making opportunistic decisions. This looks like population-level displacement. Multiple bears across multiple regions responding to similar environmental pressures at the same time. Climate change doesn't just warm the planet gradually. It creates cascading ecological effects. Altered precipitation patterns affect vegetation growth. Vegetation changes affect food availability for herbivores. Food scarcity for herbivores affects predators and omnivores. Bears, as opportunistic omnivores, feel these shifts acutely. When natural food sources decline, bears travel farther. When territory becomes contested due to population density and shrinking habitat, younger or weaker bears get pushed into marginal areas. Marginal areas now include human neighborhoods. What public safety advisories don't address. The standard wildlife management response focuses on human behavior modification, secure attractants, report sightings, stay vigilant. This approach treats symptoms while ignoring causes. I'm not suggesting people shouldn't secure trash or remove bird feeders. Those measures reduce immediate conflict risk, but they don't address why bears are showing up in places they historically avoided. The advisories also don't mention what happens to bears who become habituated to human areas. Bears that repeatedly access human food sources often get labeled as nuisance animals. Nuisance designation typically leads to relocation or lethal removal. We create the conditions that push bears into our spaces, and then we punish the bears for adapting. This cycle repeats across species and ecosystems. Mountain lions in California suburbs, coyotes in urban parks, alligators in Florida golf courses. The pattern is consistent. Habitat loss forces wildlife into human areas, human-wildlife conflict increases, and wildlife pays the price. The conversation around these bear sightings should include questions about land use planning, habitat corridor preservation, and climate adaptation strategies for wildlife. Instead, we get instructions on trash management. The security incident that doesn't belong here. The original report included a completely unrelated item, a fatal shooting near a White House security checkpoint, the third gunfire incident near President Trump in a month. Placing this incident alongside bear sightings creates a strange editorial choice. Two entirely separate stories, two different types of threat, two different responses required. But maybe this reveals something about how we process risk. Security incidents near the White House generate immediate national attention. Protocols get reviewed, security measures get enhanced, and resources get allocated. Bears appearing in residential areas across 6 states gets local news coverage and standard advisories. The systemic environmental factors driving these encounters remain largely unexamined. We respond decisively to human-created threats while treating ecological displacement as a minor inconvenience. Both situations involve safety. Both require systemic solutions, but only one gets treated as a crisis requiring structural intervention. What actually needs to happen? If we're serious about reducing human-bear conflict, we need to address habitat connectivity. That means preserving and restoring wildlife corridors. It means incorporating ecological considerations into development planning. It means acknowledging that climate change affects wildlife behavior and adapting our land management accordingly. It also means funding wildlife management agencies adequately. State wildlife departments operate on limited budgets. They're expected to monitor populations, respond to conflicts, conduct research, and educate the public while managing increasing human-wildlife interface challenges. Public education matters, but it needs to go beyond "don't feed the bears." People need to understand why bears are showing up. They need to see the connection between development patterns, climate change, and wildlife displacement. Communities in bear country need support for non-lethal conflict prevention. Bear-resistant trash containers, electric fencing for beehives and chicken coops, funding for wildlife crossing structures. These interventions work, but they require investment. We also need to stop treating every bear sighting as an emergency. Bears existed in these regions long before human development. Their presence isn't an invasion. It's a return to historic range or an adaptation to changing conditions. Learning to coexist means accepting that wildlife belongs in the landscape, even when that landscape includes human communities. The bigger picture we keep avoiding. These bear sightings are data points in a larger ecological shift. Species ranges are changing. Migration patterns are adapting. Animals are responding to environmental pressures in real time. The question isn't whether wildlife will continue appearing in unexpected places. The question is whether we'll address the systemic factors driving these changes or keep issuing the same reactive advisories. I've covered enough conservation stories to recognize when institutions prioritize messaging over solutions. The response to these bear sightings follows that pattern. Reassure the public, provide basic safety guidance, avoid discussing the uncomfortable reality that our development patterns and environmental policies create these conflicts. Wildlife doesn't have the luxury of waiting for us to get comfortable with the truth. Bears need habitat now. They need food sources now. They need space to exist without constant human conflict. Every time we frame wildlife presence as a problem to be managed rather than a symptom of ecological disruption, we miss the opportunity to address root causes. The bears showing up across 6 states this week are telling us something. The question is, are we willing to listen? What I'm watching for. I'll be tracking whether these sightings continue, whether they escalate, whether wildlife agencies start connecting these incidents to broader environmental patterns. I'll be watching for any policy responses beyond standard public advisories, any discussion of habitat restoration, any acknowledgement that this represents more than seasonal bear behavior. I'll also be watching for how many of these bears end up relocated or killed because they did exactly what any animal would do when their natural habitat can no longer support them. Because that's the real story here. Not that bears are appearing in residential areas, but that we've created conditions where they have nowhere else to go, and we're still pretending this is just about securing trash cans. The truth matters more than comfort, especially when wildlife is at stake. These bears deserve better than reactive management and surface level explanations. They deserve habitat. They deserve space. They deserve a conversation about conservation that goes deeper than telling people to bring in their bird feeders. Until we're willing to have that conversation, we'll keep seeing these incidents, and we'll keep responding with the same inadequate solutions. The bears will keep showing up. The question is whether we'll finally address why. That's it for today's episode. If this reporting matters to you, the best thing you can do is share it. Word of mouth is how independent journalism survives. You can find Wild Tomorrow on Substack, and if you want to support this work directly, there's a link in the show notes. Founding Troublemaker spots are still open for people who want to be a part of this from the ground up. I'm Katie Byers. Thanks for listening. Keep watching the horizon.